Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. You don't really apply to work at Briarcliff Sanatorium, not in the usual way. It's more like you stumble into it. Desperation meets availability. I was fresh out of the Navy, discharged honourably but aimless, scraping by with night jobs and couch surfing across Queens. A friend of mine, Bobby Ferrara, former EMT turned night orderly, texted me one night with just a location and one sentence. They need help, night shift, don't ask questions, $38 an hour. I didn't ask questions. Briarcliff Sanatorium isn't technically a state-run hospital. It's an affiliated historical institution tucked into a bend of the Taconic Parkway, about an hour north of New York City. Built in 1922, it sits on over 200 acres of old forest land near Yorktown Heights. The place has long been rumoured to be haunted or cursed, depending on who you ask. Google's no help. There are enough conspiracy threads and grainy photos to convince even the sanest person they're walking into an urban legend. But when I showed up for my first night, it wasn't ghost stories that bothered me. It was the quiet. Too quiet. The grounds were fenced in by 10-foot rusted iron rods topped with barbed wire. I buzzed the front gate, waited, and a voice came through the speaker. Name and purpose? Lucas Rains. I'm here for the night shift. Orderly. A long pause. Proceed to Building C Park in row 2. Do not leave your vehicle. Someone will meet you. That was my introduction to Briarcliff. The orientation. They don't do things formally here. No HR paperwork. No ID badge photos. No drug tests. I was handed a navy blue uniform, a ring of keys, and a laminated sheet titled Facility Regulations and Safety Protocol in all caps. Underneath that were 7 numbered rules. I'll never forget the first time I read them. Never enter Ward 5 alone. Do not respond to voices calling from locked rooms unless confirmed by radio. Always keep your staff-issued flashlight with fresh batteries. If a patient is missing but shows up on camera, do not approach. Inform control. Between 3 a.m. and 3:15 a.m. Avoid reflective surfaces. The woman in the red robe is not a patient. Do not speak to her. At the end of each shift, leave the grounds before sunrise. No exceptions. I snorted. This is a joke, right? Bobby just gave me a look. They're not kidding. He had aged 10 years since I last saw him. Deep lines creased his face. His beard was shot through with grey. You worked in Kandahar, man. You've seen real stuff, I said, trying to laugh it off. This place can't be worse than that. He didn't laugh. Briarcliff at night. The interior was a time capsule. Steel gurneys with cracked leather straps, fire doors with porthole windows, and walls tiled in pale green ceramic from floor to ceiling. Everything smelled of disinfectant and something coppery beneath. Building C housed the high-security patients. These were individuals deemed unfit for general psychiatric care. Some were survivors of failed experimental trials in the 60s, patients who had been institutionalized for decades, and others with violent, often unexplainable behaviors. There were only 17 patients in Building C, and each one had their own file thick as a brick. I shadowed Bobby for the first week. We worked from 7 p.m. to 5:30 a.m. The control room was a reinforced station with wall-mounted monitors, radios, and a heavy, multi-bolted door. We rotated patrols every hour on the hour. All patrols were done in pairs, always. The other night orderlies were an odd crew. There was Rachel, a former army medic from Fort Drum with a scar across her temple. She drank black coffee like water and rarely blinked. Peter was an ex-cop from White Plains, forced into early retirement after an incident he wouldn't talk about. He chewed nicotine gum like it owed him money. Then there was Tomas, a Czech nurse practitioner with eyes too calm for someone who'd worked here for over 10 years. You'll start to feel the building, Tomas said one night matter-of-factly. It's like a pressure in the walls. When it builds, strange things begin. I thought they were just messing with the new guy until my 3rd week. Rule 2, do not respond to voices. It was 2:47 a.m. Bobby and I were doing a routine sweep of the East Wing. Our radios crackled with static, but no anomalies on camera. As we rounded the corridor by room 12, home to a man named Edgar Clemens, who hadn't spoken a word in 6 years, I heard it. "Help! Please! I'm stuck!" A voice, childlike, fragile, coming from room 12. Bobby froze mid-step. "Don't respond." "But," he gripped my arm. "That's not Edgar. That voice has been using his room for months. Keep walking." It felt like needles crawling up my neck. The voice repeated itself, more desperate this time. I looked through the porthole. Edgar sat perfectly still in the middle of the room, facing the wall. But his lips weren't moving. Later, Bobby explained the rule again. "You hear voices all the time in Building C. The walls do things, echo, trap sound. But some of the voices, they try to mimic people. One guy followed a voice calling for help into the old laundry chute. They found his body 3 weeks later, folded in half." The woman in the red robe. Her first appearance happened during one of Rachel's shifts. She came sprinting back to control, pale as paper. She was in the mirror. I didn't understand what she meant until 2 nights later. At 3:12 a.m, I entered the staff bathroom next to Ward 5. The lights flickered overhead. I was washing my hands when I looked up and saw a figure in the mirror, standing behind me. She was pale, barefoot, and wore a scarlet robe that trailed along the floor. Her eyes were hollow, mouth slightly open. But when I spun around, the room was empty. Rule 6 immediately came to mind. The woman in the red robe is not a patient. Do not speak to her. I stood still, breathed slowly. In the mirror, she raised one finger and pointed at the bathroom door. I left without drying my hands. No one asked me what happened. Everyone just knew. Rule 5, avoid reflective surfaces. I began to notice patterns. Cameras in Hall C would go blank between 3 o'clock and 3:15 a.m. Mirrors showed reflections that didn't match reality. People walking behind you who weren't there. Your own face shifting subtly. One night, Peter caught his own reflection moving without him. "It smiled," he said later, voice shaking. "I wasn't smiling." He punched the mirror out that night and had to be restrained. The next morning, his reflection was still in the glass, even with Peter sedated in the infirmary. They boarded up every mirror in the building after that. The 7th rule. Of all the rules, the last one was the simplest and the hardest to follow. Leave the grounds before sunrise. Seems easy, right? But the longer you work there, the harder it becomes to leave. Something about Briarcliff grips you, makes you forget time. My 4th week, I almost didn't make it. I lingered at the staff lounge after clocking out, sipping vending machine coffee while watching the woods beyond the West Wing windows. Then I saw it. Every tree shadow pointing inward, toward the building. I bolted to my car and barely made it to the gate as the first rays of sun peeked over the horizon. The guard didn't say anything. He just opened the gate and made a quick sign of the cross. Breaking Rule 1. Ward 5 was always locked, no cameras, no patients assigned, no staff allowed unless escorted by control and 2 guards. Thomas once said it was a containment area for something the hospital couldn't destroy. I didn't believe him until the night someone opened it. It was 1:08 a.m. Alarms blared across the facility. Control called every available staff to respond. The door to Ward 5 stood open. Inside was a stairwell going down. We didn't even know there was a basement beneath Ward 5. No one volunteered to go in. We stood frozen, listening to wind blow upward from the dark, like a reverse draft. Something metallic clinked in the distance. Chains, maybe. Then a voice called out from the stairwell. It used my name. Lucas. I didn't go in, but Rachel almost did. Only Thomas knew what to do. He recited something in Latin, sealed the door shut with wax from the emergency candles, and duct taped the seams. "We can't let it open again," he muttered. "Not until we find the original blueprints." After that night, no one spoke about what happened in Ward 5, not officially. There were no incident reports, no disciplinary hearings, no inquiries about how the door came unlocked in the first place. Even the security footage from that hour mysteriously failed to record. When I asked Peter if he remembered who had been on camera duty, he just stared at me and quietly said, "There was no one in the booth." The stairwell beneath Ward 5 stayed sealed, but you could feel something had changed. Briarcliff became more active after that, if that's even the right word. The temperature dropped sharply around the east wing. Even when the building's boilers were working at full capacity, objects started to move, never when you were looking directly, but always just outside your peripheral vision. Light bulbs flickered in rhythm, not random strobing, but patterns. Morse code, Tomas suggested once. But when we checked the sequence, it didn't translate into anything recognizable in any known language. The incident had altered the rhythm of the place. It no longer felt like we were working around strange rules. Now it felt like the building was aware of them too, and testing them. Dr. Halverson and the unmarked blueprints. 2 weeks passed before we saw any new personnel. That night, a black SUV pulled up to the west entrance just before the 7 p.m. shift began. Out stepped a woman in her late 40s, short auburn hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a black North Face parka that looked far too clean for the rest of the building. She carried a canvas satchel and introduced herself curtly as Dr. Ingrid Halverson, Department of Parapsychology, Columbia University. Rachel met her first and immediately disliked her. I didn't blame her. Halverson didn't ask to see the patients or review the incident logs. She asked to see the basement blueprints. When we told her they were missing or incomplete, she wasn't surprised. She simply nodded and pulled out what looked like carbon-copied rolls of brittle parchment. "These are microfilm prints from a 1943 Army Corps archive," she said. "Before it was Briarcliff, this land was used as a military communications outpost." Tomas leaned over the plans and studied the lines carefully. "This corridor here," he said, pointing to a narrow shaft beneath Ward 5. "This wasn't in our schematics. It goes at least 4 levels down. No stairs, only a freight elevator." Halverson traced the drawing with a gloved finger. "It's a Cold War era vault system, likely reinforced concrete, lead shielding, Faraday cage lining. The army buried a lot of things in places like this during those years. Testing subjects, failed programs, even artifacts they didn't understand." "Artifacts?" I asked, incredulous. She glanced at me without smiling. "Things that didn't behave in accordance with the known laws of physics. Things people went missing around." That was the first time I noticed how Bobby had started flinching every time someone mentioned Ward 5. He was deteriorating, sleep-deprived, jumpy. He'd taken to muttering phrases to himself during patrol, mostly in Latin, likely copied from Tomas's rituals. I tried to ask him one night if he was okay. He just said, "It remembers the people who go near it." The incident in room 9, patient room 9, was occupied by Maria Rothstein, a middle-aged woman with a long history of institutionalization due to persistent, non-violent hallucinations. Diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, she spent most of her time sketching geometric shapes and muttering about tunnels in the sky. But something changed after Ward 5 opened. She stopped drawing and started carving. Rachel found her one morning with broken plastic utensils, having etched an intricate circular symbol into the drywall with such precision it looked engraved. We reviewed her previous sketches, and Tomas's face went pale. "The central symbol," he said slowly, "matches a protective seal from an old grimoire, one of the Solomonic texts. This isn't random." Halverson agreed. "It's a containment glyph. Old, pre-Christian. She shouldn't know this." We confiscated the utensils, replaced everything in her room with soft rubber versions, but she still managed to scratch symbols into the mattress foam using her fingernails. Her hands bled, but she didn't seem to notice. One night, she stood perfectly still and stared into the corner of her room for 5 full hours. When the camera caught her lips moving, I isolated the footage and ran the audio through enhancement software. She was speaking in reversed Latin, not gibberish, fully conjugated sentences, prayers to be exact, but directed at something rather than to a deity. Thomas called it supplication to inversion. Maria wasn't trying to protect herself anymore. She was trying to bargain. Anomaly on camera 6B, one of the few fixed cameras we relied on to monitor Ward 5's corridor, camera 6B, began malfunctioning shortly after Maria's behavior escalated. It didn't go blank. It recorded someone walking past the locked door every night at 2:41 a.m. Always the same shadow, always the same direction, toward the door, then disappearing just off frame. No entry logs showed any doors being opened, no alarms, no other cameras picked up the shadow. Peter tried replacing the camera twice. The anomaly persisted. Eventually, Halverson asked to review the last 7 nights of footage. She scrubbed through each file slowly, timestamp by timestamp, frame by frame. Then she played the footage backward. At 2:41 a.m., the shadow didn't walk into frame. It stepped out of the wall. There was no mistaking the motion. Frame by frame, you could see the distortion in the drywall, a faint ripple like heat over asphalt, and then the figure emerged. At first it resembled a man. Then it changed each night, slightly taller, slightly broader, with an unnatural symmetry that made the eyes hurt if you stared too long. Tomas called it a projection. Halverson corrected him. It's a scout. The emergency evacuation drill that wasn't. Just after midnight on a Thursday, every corridor alarm in Building C blared simultaneously. The PA system barked out, "Evacuation drill, follow protocol, do not return for personal items." The lights shut off and were replaced by rotating red strobes along the baseboards. We assembled in the main hallway near the exit, except something was off. No one from control had called the drill. Radios were dead. Even Thomas looked rattled. He turned to me and said something I didn't catch, then walked toward the stairwell leading to admin, then stopped dead. On the far end of the corridor, 2 people were walking toward us. A man and a woman, white scrubs, faces calm, identical strides. Except we had no staff on that rotation. I counted heads. All of us were already there. Thomas pulled Rachel aside and whispered fast and low. She nodded and quietly handed out small vials of anise oil, something he'd prepared weeks ago, in case they decided to test thresholds. The 2 figures kept walking, unblinking, silent. Then they just disappeared, not turned a corner, not faded, gone, as if they'd never been there. The alarm stopped, the lights returned, radio static returned, followed by a panicked voice from control, asking what the hell had just happened. There had been no drill, no scheduled test, and worst of all, no log of the alarm ever being triggered. The whisper room. Late one shift, Tomas brought me to a room none of us had used before. It was tucked between the old hydrotherapy chambers and what looked like a decommissioned laundry room. The door was unmarked, the inside empty except for a few dust-covered chairs and a rusted drain in the middle of the floor. "This is where they used to put patients before transfer," he said, "when they stopped using drugs and started using voices." I didn't understand until I sat down. The room had a hum, not a mechanical one, but tonal, musical almost. I started hearing faint whispers. Nothing clear, just fragments, names, phrases. The longer I stayed, the more distinct they became. They were speaking about me, not to me, about me, things no one could know, memories, regrets, details I hadn't shared with anyone since I was a child. I left the room shaking. Tomas placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Now you understand what this place feeds on. Changes in the staff. Bobby was the first to go. One night, he didn't show up. No call, no resignation. His apartment was empty, no signs of struggle. Just a single sticky note on the fridge that said, It followed me home. Rachel started suffering blackouts. She'd come to in the middle of shifts in different parts of the building with no memory of how she got there. We had to start using the buddy system even between wings. Peter started drinking again. The smell was faint but there. And me, I started dreaming about the stairwell in Ward 5. Every night, I'd descend deeper, the steps narrowing and twisting like a corkscrew. Sometimes I heard chanting, sometimes music, but I never reached the bottom. I always woke up in the same state, sweating, heartbeat thunderous, nails dug into my palms. But it wasn't just a dream. The images stayed with me in perfect detail, more vivid than anything else in waking life. I could even remember the exact number of steps I took each time. 61, 62, 63, and then I'd wake. Eventually, I started recording the number each morning. The count increased with every dream. 68, 74, 82. It didn't reset. It progressed like I was descending one level further every night. I never told Tomas at first. I didn't need to. He looked at me one morning, glanced at the fresh scratch marks on my forearms, and just nodded. "You're being pulled," he said quietly. "You didn't break a rule, but something noticed you noticing." The containment chamber, beneath the chapel. Dr. Halverson, for all her clinical detachment, finally admitted she was out of her depth. She requested clearance to the locked sublevels, the ones beneath the abandoned chapel wing, where the older stonework diverged from the modern hospital construction. The request was, strangely, approved within hours. That never happened before. Admin usually dragged their feet for days. Either someone higher up already knew what she was looking for, or they were eager for her to find it. Thomas, Rachel and I accompanied her through the sealed corridor. The entry keycard beeped, but the reinforced metal door wouldn't open until Thomas traced something along the seam with a powdered mixture of salt and iron filings. Then it groaned open, reluctantly, like something behind it was holding back. Inside was a long hallway of brick and rusted pipework. The air so cold it felt refrigerated. Every few feet, thick metal doors broke the monotony, each one marked only with a number and a faded red triangle beneath it. Room 3 still had chains bolted into the floor. Room 7 had scratch marks on the inside of the door deep, almost gouged with claws. The last chamber had no number, just a sigil carved into the stone. A circle with overlapping crescents, flanked by what looked like open eyes. It didn't match any symbology I'd seen before. Not religious, not alchemical. Thomas stepped back the moment he saw it. "That's not a human seal," he said. "It's an invitation." Halverson insisted we enter. The room was octagonal, walls covered in reflective panels, like polished obsidian or black glass. In the center stood a steel cube, maybe 5 feet tall, humming slightly. The hum wasn't mechanical. It had tone like it was singing without making sound. Something vibrated just below conscious hearing. The air had weight. My ears popped like we were descending rapidly in altitude. "This wasn't built by the hospital," Halverson said, her voice low. "This was here when they bought the property." Tomas ran his fingers along the cube's surface and frowned. "It's warded, not sealed. That means it's not keeping something in. It's keeping the rest of us out." I remember I whispered something without meaning to, just 2 words. I didn't know why I said them until Halverson froze and turned to me slowly. "You said amnion null. Why?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I heard it in my head just now." Her face was pale. "That's from an old classified file I read once. Decades old military notes from an abandoned Soviet project. It means empty womb. A place where something was gestated but never born." The cube began to vibrate harder. We left. Rule 3 was never a joke. We'd laughed about it when we were first hired. Rule 3. If you hear whistling at 3:33 a.m., don't follow it, no matter who it sounds like. It always seemed absurd, too specific, too ridiculous. Most of us assumed it was just a scare tactic to keep the newbies in line. Then it happened. It started with Rachel. She heard someone whistling an old lullaby near the fire exit one night. She thought it was Bobby's tune. Said she hadn't realized how much she missed it. She walked toward the sound, but it stopped the moment she reached the stairwell. She told me later that something about the air shifted when she crossed the threshold, like a static charge filled the air, but colder, heavier. The lights above her buzzed loudly, and the emergency sign flickered so violently it strobed. Then someone whispered her name 3 times. Each whisper came from a different direction. She ran back without opening the door. Thomas scolded her like a parent would a child. You never acknowledge it. Don't follow it. Don't answer. It mimics what it thinks you miss most. It tried with Peter next. He said it sounded like his sister, who'd passed away 5 years ago. Then it was my turn. I woke in the break room, unsure how I'd fallen asleep. It was 3:33 a.m. on the dot. The digital clock buzzed faintly. Then came the whistle. Off-key, but familiar. My grandfather used to whistle that tune when we went fishing. I hadn't heard it in over 20 years. It sounded like he was just outside the hallway, pacing slowly. I stayed still, didn't move, didn't speak. The whistling stopped. Then someone knocked. 3 soft taps on the glass pane of the break room door. When I turned my head, the hallway was empty, but the glass held a handprint, small, like a child's. I didn't sleep for 2 nights after that. The night we lost Thomas, we didn't find him until the following morning, but we knew something had happened around 2 a.m. because the building itself changed. Doors refused to open. Lights shut off even in areas that had power. The air smelled like burnt iron and rose water. Every reflective surface in the building, monitors, window panes, even the polished metal of sink faucets, showed not our reflections but slightly altered versions of ourselves. Same posture, same movement, but their eyes didn't blink. Rachel and I found Tomas collapsed at the base of the sealed stairwell beneath Ward 5. He was unconscious, a smear of blood on the floor from his nose and ears. He was clutching an object in his right hand, a brass pendant shaped like a keyhole, etched with more Latin. We didn't try to open his fingers. Halverson arrived and immediately began a series of tests. She measured electromagnetic fields, air ionization, even tested the brass for residual heat. Then she looked at the stairwell door and said, something responded to his presence. It recognized his blood. We carried him to the infirmary. He didn't wake up for 3 days. When he did, he looked different. Not just tired, emptied, like something had hollowed out part of him and left only the framework behind. He didn't speak for hours. When he finally did, all he said was, "The bottom isn't a place, it's a threshold." The blueprints were lying. Halverson re-examined the microfilm prints the night after Thomas's collapse. She enlarged the images, cross-referenced them with geological scans, and finally noticed something that hadn't been there before. A subtle overlay, barely perceptible lines embedded between the floor levels. When we isolated them, the markings formed a map not of hallways, but veins, like a circulatory system. The hospital was built around something. It wasn't just designed for care, it was designed to feed. Each major incident site, room 9, the stairwell, the chapel chamber, was a pressure point, and beneath them, something pulsed faintly, like it was waiting for alignment. There are 7 convergence zones, Halverson said, voice dry. They form a pattern called a heptagon seal. It's ancient. Very few examples exist outside grimoires and forbidden texts, but it's meant for containment. Whatever's below us isn't trapped, it's sleeping. And the rules? I asked. Meant to delay it, distract it, keep it occupied. That's when we realized rule 1, don't talk to the patient in the red room, wasn't about safety, it was about distraction, keeping someone entertained long enough to avoid breaking the seal. It had been right there in front of us the whole time. Room 108C, referred to only as the red room by those of us who worked the overnight shift, wasn't a danger because of what was inside. It was a necessary pressure valve, a sacrifice of attention, maybe even of energy. All those long shifts where one of us had to post up by the door, listen for muttering, whisper back through the slot if prompted. We thought it was containment. It wasn't. It was feeding not food, not in a traditional sense, but attention, time, thought. Something about the human presence kept whatever was underneath that room occupied, like it needed an audience. We checked the logs. The last time someone had visited the Red Room properly, meaning sat the full rotation, responded to the patient's questions, and remained until their relief arrived, was 3 weeks prior. We'd all been so distracted by the dreams, by the stairwell, the cube, the whistling, that we'd neglected the one rule designed to hold something in place. I remember the moment that sank in for all of us. Rachel looked up from the duty roster and whispered, "We've been starving it." And then we all felt it at the same time. A subtle vibration in the soles of our shoes. The floor shivered just slightly, like something had exhaled very slowly underneath the building. The patient without a name. Dr. Halverson ordered immediate access to 108C. She didn't trust the old keypad outside the room, so we forced the lock manually. Tomas had brought bolt cutters and a pry bar from maintenance. The hallway leading to the room was colder than it should have been. The overhead lights buzzed, but didn't flicker. There was an unnatural consistency to the glow, like a brightness dial cranked too high. And the smell, anise, rust, and old earth. Inside, the Red Room hadn't changed in the slightest since I'd last seen it. No furniture, no medical equipment, just a simple cot, a concrete floor stained with faded brown, and that single reinforced glass panel in the door that never quite seemed to show the full picture of the interior from the outside. But this time, when we entered, the patient was gone. No signs of a struggle, no broken glass. The cuffs and straps on the cot were still buckled, just empty. But written on the wall in something like charcoal, or possibly scorched ash, was a Latin phrase, repeated in a circular pattern over and over again. I took a photo and handed it to Tomas, who translated it slowly. "A mind unattended is a door left open." Halverson didn't speak. She just turned, walked back into the hallway, and radioed the admin office to initiate a full lockdown. No one responded. She tried the internal channel for security. Silence. We split up immediately. Rachel went to check the front gate. I ran to the backup generator room to ensure our comms weren't being jammed. Tomas returned to the stairwell beneath Ward 5. He didn't wait this time. Descent without end. I found him 15 minutes later. The wax seal had been broken, the duct tape peeled away, and the stairwell door was wide open, the air behind it a different temperature entirely, warmer, almost humid. The smell reminded me of a greenhouse, but laced with something sharp, like formaldehyde. He was already 5 levels down, flashlight swinging at each landing. I shouted to him, and he paused just long enough to yell back, "It's waking up, I have to buy us time." I followed without thinking. The stairwell shouldn't have gone deeper than 2 sublevels. The original blueprints confirmed that. But I counted as I descended. 6 flights, then 10, then 17. The walls changed slowly, from concrete to stone, then to something older. Masonry that looked hand-carved, eroded in places. There were sigils carved into the walls at regular intervals, repeating patterns of 7-pointed stars and inverted trees. On the 22nd landing, the electric lights ended. The only light was Tomas's flashlight ahead of me. On the 33rd landing, the steps ended. There was a door, simple, unmarked, wooden, but the air behind it carried that same humming tone we'd felt in the octagonal room beneath the chapel. I caught up with Tomas as he studied the door with his palm flat against it. "This is it," he said, "the real threshold." I asked what was behind it. He only said, "What sleeps behind the curtain is not a god. It's not a demon. It's a witness, and it's hungry for what it hasn't seen." He pressed his palm into the sigil carved into the door. There was a click, not mechanical, more like a bone snapping, and the door eased open by itself. The hollow room, Beyond the door was not a chamber in any architectural sense. It was space, curved, dim, and pulsating faintly with colourless light. The walls were neither stone nor metal, but seemed organic, smooth and irregular, as though we were inside something living. There were 7 spires arranged in a circle, rising from the floor like teeth, each humming at a different frequency. In the centre, a depression, not a pit, not a hole, a womb, empty. Something had left, and along the inside of the spires, symbols blinked into view. Glyphs we'd seen above ground, in the margins of the blueprint overlays, the same repeated marks burned into the surface of room 9's floor. Tomas began to recite something, not Latin this time, something harsher, older. The words made my teeth itch. The walls reacted, subtle pulses matching his voice, until a frequency somewhere in the chamber pushed hard enough against my skull that I staggered. Blood ran from my nose. He screamed at me to leave, now. I turned back up the stairs. He didn't follow. The hospital isn't a hospital anymore. When I emerged from the stairwell, 45 minutes later, by my watch, the hospital was silent. Lights flickered inconsistently. The power grid had reset and every digital clock in the building displayed the same time. 3:33. Rachel was gone. Halverson was gone. So were the patients. Every room was empty, beds neatly made, doors wide open. The only signs of disturbance were the footprints, muddy, bare, and always facing toward room 108C. I followed them. The red room's door was closed again. The keypad scorched. The window was blacked out entirely, as though something had melted the glass from the inside. I approached slowly. The humming sound returned, not from behind the door, but from within the walls. And then the glass cleared, not by melting, but like a camera lens being wiped. Inside the red room was me, standing, smiling, and the figure tilted its head, lifted its hand, and traced a circle in the air. I ran. I don't remember how long or how far. Eventually, I found a side entrance unlocked and stumbled into the cold night. The road outside was empty, the security gate up, the booth unmanned. My car was still parked where I left it. When I returned the next day with state police, the hospital was sealed, chained. The address no longer matched public records. The officers looked at me like I was confused. "Sir, the old St. Eliwan complex was condemned in 2003. Nothing's been operating there in years." They escorted me off the property. What I know now. Tomas never came back. Rachel's number was disconnected. Halverson's credentials were wiped from the State Registry of Medical Professionals. I checked every known database. FOIA requests, private networks, even international academic circles. St. Eliwan Psychiatric Hospital has no operating license, no tax record, no construction permit history beyond 1956, but I still dream. The stairwell, the descent, the chanting. Last night, I reached step 154. Still not the bottom, but I'm closer than I've ever been. I see faces in the walls now, not terrifying, just watching curious. I don't work there anymore, obviously, but I know that place isn't done with me. Something was invited in long ago, and our rules were never meant to keep us safe. They were agreements, contracts. We broke them. If you ever hear about a place with a red room, with 7 rules no one understands, don't investigate, don't ask, don't get curious, because the moment you do, you start counting stairs in your dreams, and you never stop. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.